My boyfriend is pursuing dark or dense sexuality. What do I do? It's not a question from me. I'm married to a woman. However, it is a question from a follower that I received. So I started to explore this notion of dark or dense sexuality. What is it? Where does it come from? There is a fine line that we walk when it comes to sexuality. Sexuality in our society is so distorted. Not because the act of sex or sexuality itself is, but the way that we interpret it, the way that we teach it, the way that we speak about it, the way that we embody it, the shame that surrounds sexuality, and the distortions or the pathologies that come from that. It's a very complex psychosocial biological issue in our society and in the self. So let's get clear on some things. Sexuality is sacred. All expressions of sexuality is sacred. You having a preference or what can be known as a kink or a fantasy is not bad. It's not unhealthy. There's a fine line between kink and fetish. Fetish is more obsessive, more compulsive, more addicted to, I cannot live without this in my life. And it's expressed through sexual means. That can be then very difficult for us because it is something that controls us and controls how we behave. Something outside of us, we place power in something outside of us needing to happen in a particular way for us to feel safe. So let's explore dark or shadow sexuality. What is it? Where does it come from? So whilst this is a very integrated subject, a very deep and complex subject, and one that I can speak to for a long time, for hours and hours and hours, and still not completely understand it myself. I'm in this space. But for you, for us to understand our own sexuality, we must place attention to this. Get very clear on what are our needs, what are our desires, what are we suppressing? Because part of dark or dense or shadow sexuality is this suppression of self because we carry shame around our expression, our thoughts, our beliefs, our desires around sexuality. So this dark, dense sexuality, it's an addiction. It's maybe in your life as a young person, you've lost control of who you've been. You gave your power away. You gave your voice away. You were suppressed. You were physically, emotionally, and or sexually abused. You internalized that, created shame within yourself, made that your fault. As an adult, when we feel suppressed as children, we want to, at some level, gain that control back. Sometimes it's through very overt oppression. It's by being abrasive and loud and bigger than to protect the fragility of our hearts. For others, it's a retraction from the world. It's hiding. That keeps me safe. Sometimes it plays out in relationships, in sexuality. Now, submissiveness and dominance is not bad. It can be very healthy when it's consensual. But when sexuality becomes controlling and oppressive, hyper selfish, not considerate of the other involved, that's different. That's not healthy expressions of sexuality or healthy expressions of dominance and submission because there's no safety and trust there. You see, shadow sexuality is all about satisfying and gratifying the self. Sometimes it comes from vanity and forms of narcissism, whether it's a person, the expression of the personality disorder of narcissism or traits of narcissism. Other times it comes from feeling very unsafe and needing to control, and it comes out in the form of sexuality. So this is a very complex conversation, one that requires compassion, empathy, understanding, insight into the individual, insight into your own sense of self, what's happening in your body and heart, What do you really need? What is not expressed? Are you suppressing your fantasies? Have you been told that sex and sexual expression is wrong? Do you have sexual education? Do you know your own body? Do you love your own body? Do you care for your own body? Are you seeking control because you feel unsafe? Because you have unresolved trauma? This feeling of not being safe, this sense of unresolved trauma, wounding, experiences from the past that you haven't dealt with, forgiveness that you haven't given out because you haven't felt the unexpressed feelings that are trapped within you. Does it leak out in sexuality because you've found that's a place where you can be powerful? And now all of a sudden that is morphing into something too intense, that is not considerate or consensual, that is now oppressing others, controlling others, manipulating others. This is part of shadow sexuality. We're not connected to the core of who we are. We cannot be transparent with others. We feel we cannot be seen. We cannot be understood. We cannot be heard. We fear being rejected, abandoned, humiliated. So we place ourselves in a position of excessive dominance. It's our way or no way. We become obsessive. We become addicted to the power, to the control, to the way something needs to be. And sometimes there's abnormalities that are thrown into the mix, a degree of abnormality that's excess. And again, so much of this is subjective. There's no fine line, there's no clear point on, oh, this is healthy kink and this is unhealthy fetish. There's no real space for that. Let me turn that sound off. There's no real space for that. And what I mean by that is we get lost. We become lost in who are we? And we attempt to find and create our identity in the world through our sexual exploitations. Now that in and of itself is not necessarily unhealthy, but it's how it's done, it's where it's coming from. So dense, dark sexuality, this question that this woman put through, she's concerned because she's feeling suppressed. She's feeling oppressed. She's feeling out of control. She's seeing her partner manipulate the situation. She's witnessing her partner hide in shadows. Other expressions of shadow sexuality: addictions to pornography, excessive masturbation, gauging your own self-worth in the quantity of sexual partners that you have, gauging your own self-worth and your own sense of sovereignty based on the feedback that you get from others. In other words, if your sexual exploration is coming from a place of low self-worth, lowered self-worth, you don't believe in yourself and you need others to validate your experience, that's a form of shadow sexuality or dark sexuality. Let me be very clear on something. Use the term dark and light for contrasted purposes to help us understand. Dark isn't bad. There are so many expressions in the realm of kink, for example, and kink can be mistaken. That healthy sexual exploration of kink, which is outside the norm, quote unquote the norm, can be mislabeled and misunderstood as something that is shadow sexuality or bad sexuality or obsessive, compulsive, addicted, controlling, manipulative sexuality. No. If it's consensual, if there is trust between the people involved, if it's coming from a healthy, safe place, a healthy space within self of exploration, curiosity. Because we begin to form our sexual identities at various stages through our lives, but this expression of kink or fantasy or what is it that we wish to explore, how do we wish to express ourselves in the world between the ages of 11 and 14. And if that's interrupted or disrupted, we lose a sense of who we are. We think we're less than. We carry shame. We don't trust ourselves. That leaks out. that expresses in different ways. And so how do we be with someone that is experiencing? Because what we've done now is we've covered some areas of where some dark sexuality can come from. That sense of being repressed, that giving power away, losing voice, being abused, not having fundamental education, low self-worth, carrying shame around sexuality. Maybe you've been bullied around your body, you have body shame, a low body sense of self-worth. And how it's been maybe played out in your life, but how do we be with someone that we care for deeply, where we do see them and we want to be with them, but our sexual, energetic, or our sexual signatures aren't matching and unifying? This woman that approached me said, it's too intense for me. I don't feel safe. I can't trust him. There's also infidelity that was involved with that, and that can be an expression of shadow sexuality. The infidelity, the dishonesty, the inability to be real, because we can't be transparent. We've been persecuted in the past for that. If you're one of those people that's been persecuted in the past for being honest, you will struggle to be honest in the present because there's too much shame associated with it. There's too much pain associated with it. Shadow sexuality also seeks to compensate for where we perceive we lack. And so again, we're just trying to gain power outside of ourselves from somewhere. So how do you be with that person? You must speak your vulnerable truth. And you have to be careful, because often with individuals that are engaged in shadow sexuality, obsessive, compulsive, addicted sexuality, there are elements of because narcissism resides on a spectrum. They may not have NPD, which is treatable and needs to be treatable and is a serious mental condition, cognitive condition, psychological condition. They may have elements of narcissism in their trait expression. How do you deal with that? Because that can be very difficult, because there can be high levels of manipulation there. There can be gaslighting and convincing, and you fall into that trap. But you have to be vulnerable. You have to be open in a non-attached way, and you have to be compassionate with yourself and with that person, particularly if you care for them. Ask them, can we seek help together? Can we seek guidance together? Can you bring that to the light? When we bring our shadows to the light, that is what diffuses shame. Bringing shame to the light, holding it in a non-judgmental way. But remember, you have to do that while setting healthy boundaries. In other words, what are your needs? Get clear on that. Can you bring your voice into that container? And can you make a decision for you that may be very painful? You may have to leave or create space in that relationship if it's not serving you, if you're not being treated with equity, if you're not being seen, if you're not being appreciated. So being with anyone that has any compulsion or any addiction, or a very low sense of self-worth that is then compensated for through power struggles or the application of excessive power over others or over a situation, can be very difficult to handle, and you have to be able to recognize that. Create space for yourself to make a self-honoring decision, because you may have to leave that relationship. But can you do that with compassion if you do make that choice? Can you do that with non-judgment if you do make that choice? Power and blessings to you. Let me know your thoughts. Speak to you soon.